Hi, Eli and Maddie. Daddy here again. I hope you guys are still really well and keeping safe as always. No, wait, there's no call for that. The global pandemic is officially coming to an end. Um, like all huge events, global events, the end will never be clean. It will never be an easy or difficulty-free end. And there has been a lot of confusion over a new strain of coronavirus which has spread across Europe, which has perhaps glibly been labelled in the press the India variant or Indian variant. But the vaccine still works against this, apparently, so, it's not too much of a horror so far. I've had my first vaccine, it's probably gone by now, and I've got my second vaccine coming up, I think, in about 2 weeks. So yes, we're all well on track. Things are beginning to reopen. I, in fact, have my first music booking. I had my first rehearsal in person, as in not a virtual rehearsal, with real people singing right next to me, around me. And I was playing and conducting. And that was extraordinary and wonderful and beautiful. And we are busily preparing for Harrow Opera's 50th anniversary gala at the end of this month. We are now in June, beginning of June, which makes it 15 months now. And of course, I've documented that time for you because it's, in my lifetime, it's an unprecedented thing. And hopefully, in your lifetime, it will be, you won't see a time like this. They occur, I say hopefully, because, I want you to live a very long and happy, fruitful life. But of course, they occur approximately once every 100 years. There was, of course, 1918, the big Spanish flu outbreak. And back in 1818, or was it 1820, sorry, there was another global outbreak. But I found myself thinking recently that I totally understood the phrase, the roaring 20s. Because, as things are reopening now and bars and things, people just want to put on anything and go out and dance and be happy and generally, let their hair down and act like, no one's watching anymore. So yes, of course, we are now on, I think this is vlog 99, so we're almost perfectly full circle. And of course, I shall deeply miss doing these vlogs for you. But we have come full circle. There is another episode of Morgan and Muffle, the comedy, which I was in the middle of doing for you when we got to the end of coronavirus. And it's on 2 episodes, and I simply can't, for artistic balance reasons, I can't do 2 episodes. It has to be an odd number, so I have to do 3. So there will be that. But of course, there is also my new book, Fairytales and Oddities, which is pretty much, it's not an insubstantial book, but this was pretty much entirely put together during the lockdown because, of course, as a musician, I wasn't allowed to work. And of course, it's for you, for Eli, as always. So this is your book, my darling children. And yes, Fairytales and Oddities. I shall, of course, do a couple of vlogs on this for marketing reasons. And they'll be they won't be personal for you. So I probably won't include them in this actual vlog or vlog series. But yes, I'll be doing a couple of interviews. And in fact, I've done a few radio interviews over the pandemic anyway. And well, here's one actually. I'll leave you with this for today. This was, I think, a week ago. I was asked. Of course, I'm known as a musician. I'm not as well known as a writer yet. So I was asked to appear on a radio show as a musician. But of course, I plugged the book as much as I could. So here's my radio interview, and I hope you enjoy. I might stick a couple of photos on it to make it more entertaining. Rather than just listening to it. But, I sort of, I kind of try to talk in paragraphs and give a bit of education. And also entertainment, tell a few anecdotes, slip in a few jokes here and there. So yeah, there is that. and I look forward to seeing you all very soon. Daddy loves you always. Mwah!
You're listening to 92.6 FM Radio Verulam. My name is Richard Wyborn, and we've just been listening to the American-born Greek soprano Maria Callas performing an aria from Act 2 of Verdi's opera A Masked Ball, which received its premiere at the Teatro Apollo in Rome in 1859. Verdi's A Masked Ball was also supposed to be performed by Harrow Opera at the Compass Theatre in Ickenham in March 2020, but unfortunately, due to the COVID-19 pandemic, the performance had to be cancelled. I have the very great privilege to be joined today by the musical director of Harrow Opera, who has also been the musical director of Brent Opera, the London Players, and Secret Opera, Mr. Ezra Williams. Hello, Ezra.
Hello, Richard. Thank you so much for having me on.
Well, thank you for coming. Ezra, can you tell us about the history of Harrow Opera and your involvement with it?
Well, I became music director of Harrow Opera 3 years ago. And since then, we've done a production of Rusalka and various galas. And also, of course, we'd got to the dress rehearsal of Un ballo in maschera, A Masked Ball, when, as you rightly said, the COVID restrictions kicked in and theatres were closed. So yes, I joined it when their previous music director moved abroad, I think it was. So they were looking for someone else, and I was recommended because I'd been working with the London Opera Players. And so Marianne Wenzel, who is the owner of Harrow Opera, I suppose you could call her, she's also a fabulous singer herself. And she contacted me and asked if I'd come along and see if I wanted to do it. A funny little story is I said yes to music directing Rusalka, which was an opera I didn't know at the time. I said yes to it without looking at the score, which was perhaps a little bit ill-advised, as when I got the score, it turned out to be fantastically challenging. But actually it ended up being a great production. We all loved it. And of course, you yourself were in that production.
Yeah, was Rusalka at all influenced by Wagner, do you think?
Oh, very much so. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, Wagner, you couldn't get away from his influence all across Europe at that time, especially operatically. People often forget how early Wagner was, actually. I mean, Rossini was still alive when Wagner was born. I mean, it's astounding. But yes, I mean, Wagner's influence is as much part of Rusalka as it is in things like Hansel and Gretel, for example, which is so Wagnerian. It's quite astounding. And I've done that as well, although not with Harrow Opera.
Am I correct in thinking that Harrow Opera will soon be celebrating its 50th anniversary?
It will indeed. So it was Harrow Opera, of course, was born before I was even born. And the 50th anniversary concert gala celebration, whatever you prefer to call it, will take place on June the 26th at 7:30 in St. John's Church, Hallowell Road in Norfolk. And for that gala, many performers who were in previous productions have been invited along to reprise small snippets of the roles they sang then. And in fact, we're doing the great duet from Cavalleria Rusticana, and the lady Elaine singing Santuzza sang it with Harrow Opera over 20 years ago. So it'll be fabulous for me to see all these older people whom I don't know coming in to sing. And of course, I'll be music directing that.
Yeah, actually, you're making me feel old now because I celebrated my 50th birthday last year, actually.
So you were one when Harrow Opera was born.
Yeah. What are Harrow Opera's plans for its 50th anniversary?
Well, it's really just that big gala, which, of course, we're all fingers crossed, hoping will go ahead without a hitch. Of course, there'll be lots of rules to follow. The audience will be socially distanced, as will the performers. And rehearsals will be staggered so that not as many people will be in the same rehearsal space at the same time. So it's been a bit of a logistical undertaking, as well as a fascinating musical one. But hopefully on the 26th of June, I think that's the last Saturday in June, that should all be going ahead. And then, of course, it's full steam to hopefully bring Ballo to the stage in October.
Well, Harrow Opera will also, Harrow Opera will also be performing a masked ball later on this year, as you already mentioned. Have the COVID pandemic posed problems for operas and choirs?
Well, yes. I mean, I can't overstate enough just how many problems it has caused. And of course, you know, the whole music industry has been roundly decimated. I'm hoping this situation is beginning to ease a little. Opera productions have, of course, continued in Europe. But these opera houses, Vienna, Munich, Turin, I think it was, no, it was Naples, where they just did a big Cavalleria. They have big name stars. So although there wasn't an audience, they were broadcast, and they, you know, and I think those companies had the money to give the singers tests 3 times a week, and to keep everybody safe. Whereas smaller companies like Harrow, of course, we don't have that privilege. Choirs, for their very nature, of course, of close proximity singing, you know, just completely ceased. And of course, you know, the nature of the beast is you can't have the sections too far apart, because then you run into enormous timing problems. And plus you can't hear each other in a choir. I don't sing in choirs anymore, but I did, I used to 25 years ago or so. So yes, it's been a very sad year for all of us musicians. Us stage animals have kind of lost a part of our lives that, you know, is incredibly fulfilling for us. But hopefully we'll start getting back to normal. I have my first COVID vaccine jab next week, and a lot of my friends have had theirs first. So yeah, fingers crossed, and full steam ahead to bring Ballo to the stage in October, again at the Ickenham Theatre, where we were originally supposed to be. And that will be the longest opera production I've ever been involved in. It will be almost 2 years by the time we finally make it to stage. So I think it will be a very emotional opening night. Let's put it that way.
Ezra, am I correct in thinking that you have performed on television with the Spanish tenor Jose Carreras?
Indeed. That's a funny story. I began, I mean, I know I'm only very, very early 40s, but I've in some ways feel like music's been my entire life, because I went to a music school, Purcell School, before I then went on to music college. So we, of course, were essentially performing in public professionally when we were 14, 13. And with Jose Carreras, that came about, I mean, I've sung with Jose Carreras a few times. I was in the chorus or extra chorus for his last appearance at Covent Garden in Verdi's Stiffelio, where he sort of unofficially retired from the opera stage, but not the recital stage after that. I think that was 1993. But on TV, that was Purcell School won a competition. Well, no, we got asked to appear on a show called A Song for Christmas, which is now sadly no longer running. That was at Pebble Mill in Birmingham, presented by Alan Titchmarsh. And funnily enough, 2 years before we did it, and we did win joint first prize, I should unbashfully add, Gary Barlow had won it, of Take That fame. So it was, you know, it was quite a good show actually while it lasted. And Jose Carreras came on to sing White Christmas, and we all sang with him. And yes, I mean, he became a great kind of mentor of mine. I spoke to him afterwards, and I've always loved his voice. His legato was incomparable. Obviously, his leukemia badly damaged his stamina more than anything else. I don't think it damaged his voice particularly, but certainly his stamina, and he could no longer physically, after the early 90s, really appear in operas on stage, because people forget just how physical a job it is, being an opera singer.
Well, now we're going to hear Jose Carreras and Kiri Takanoa singing the duet Tonight from the musical by Leonard Bernstein and Stephen Sondheim, West Side Story.
Oh, I love this.
And there's nothing for but Maria. Every sight that I see is Maria.
Tony, Tony.
Always you, every thought I'll ever know. Everywhere I go, you'll be in me.
Tonight, it all began
There we heard Jose Carreras with Kirita Kanoa performing tonight from Leonard Bernstein's musical West Side Story. Ezra, have you performed in West Side Story at all?
Indeed, I have. It was actually, for a very brief time in my student days, one of my most often performed roles together with Puccini's La Bohème, Rodolfo in that opera. Since then, obviously, it's been overtaken by a lot of other parts. But yeah, I mean, I love West Side Story. It's just sublime music. The lyrics are wonderful as well. There are a lot of rumors in the music world that Sondheim was not just responsible for the lyrics and did actually play quite a large part in chunks of the music. I mean, if you listen to Cool, for example, the shape of the melody is so Sondheim that you do wonder whether him and Bernstein collaborated a little closer than perhaps people realize on the actual music and not just the lyrics. But it's a wonderful piece and I loved singing it. I've sung it in American and I've sung it in an English version. And the last time I did it, I think was about 12 years ago with the wonderful actress Lily Lo Myers as Maria. And yes, I mean, it's sublime music. It's wonderful. I'm not sure if I could get away with singing it now. I think I'm a little old for it. But I've recorded Maria and I've recorded Tonight. And if there was anything else from it I could feasibly do in recitals, then I might. But Maria's a great sing for a tenor. It's wonderful.
Well, was Leonard Bernstein more a classical composer or a composer of musicals?
Well, I think Lenny himself put this best when he said to Duke Ellington, you compose jazz symphonies and I compose symphonic jazz. And, that was a very admiring comment. I do think Bernstein is steeped in the classical tradition. I think his Broadway, unlike, say, Gershwin, who is very much came from the jazz world, Bernstein was a classical composer. I mean, his symphonic stuff is extremely classical. Symphony of Psalms, for example, and all those kind of pieces. Plus all his Jewish religious music. Let's not forget. But of course, he'll always be remembered for the shows. And of course, let's not forget his film music. He famously, did he win the Oscar for On the Waterfront? I'm not sure. But certainly that film did win quite a lot of Oscars. And that soundtrack for On the Waterfront is some of Bernstein's best work and actually has been plagiarized quite heavily by later composers. If you watch the Al Pacino film City Hall from the late 90s, there's a whole part of that soundtrack that has been lifted quite blatantly from Bernstein's wonderful score for On the Waterfront. But he wrote symphonic music using his kind of leitmotif themes that he used in his stage work. So, for example, in On the Waterfront, when we first meet Marlon Brando's character, Terry Malloy, you get these kind of threatening saxophones, and then the drums on the docks. So he wrote, even his film work was quite stage oriented. But I'll always think of him as a classical composer, and a great pianist and a great teacher. Let's not forget. I think a lot of Bernstein's legacy is his phenomenal teaching that's often forgotten these days. But of course, West Side Story will always be his indelible masterpiece. And I think he himself was very honest that he probably spent the rest of his life trying to rewrite West Side Story, or at least recapture some of that stardust.
Well, to what extent was Leonard Bernstein influenced by the music of Rodgers and Hammerstein?
Well, I mean, enormously. I mean, let's not forget, Stephen Sondheim, for example, studied with Jerome Kern, who wrote Showboat. That seems hard to get one's head around, but of course, Sondheim now must be in his 90s now. And of course, Jerome Kern, Oscar Hammerstein was one of the librettists on Showboat. So they would have met, they would have known each other. Not all Hammerstein has dated well. I think it's quite rare these days to find a production of, say, Flower Drum Song, just because culturally we're in a different landscape now. But yeah, Rodgers and Hammerstein. It's, you know, also The King and I is problematic for political reasons. But yes, I mean, they're fabulous, fabulous lyricists and enormously influential, enormously.
Well, now we're going to hear yourself singing a song from the Rodgers and Hammerstein musical Carousel. This is You'll Never Walk Alone.
When you walk through a storm, hold your head up high, and don't be afraid of the dark. At the end of the storm is a golden sky and the sweet silver song of a lark. Walk on through the wind, walk on through the rain, though your dreams be tossed and blown. Walk on, with hope in your heart, and you'll never walk alone. You'll never walk alone. At the end of the storm is a golden sky and the sweet silver song of a lark. Walk on through the wind, walk on
There we heard You'll Never Walk Alone, originally composed by Rodgers and Hammerstein for the musical Carousel, and sung there by Ezra Williams, who is my guest today on Radio Verulam. Well, the next piece of music that we're going to hear is yourself singing the Neapolitan song composed by Ernesto de Curtis in 1912, Non ti scorda di me, which means don't forget about me. Ezra, can you tell us about this song?
Yes, well, Non ti scorda di me is a tenor favourite. It was, it was recorded by Gili and all the great early tenors, but I think it was Pavarotti who really brought it to, popular acclaim. It's for a Neapolitan song. Us tenors sing a lot of them. Baritones have started to adopt them. Dmitri Hvorostovsky started to sing a lot of slightly lower versions of the tenor ones, like Cor Ingrato and all those. But they were traditionally tenor songs. Non ti scordar di me is notable because it's probably the hardest to sing of all those songs. Not just because of how high it lies, it's consistently high. There's very little that is kind of middle to lower register. But also because it has this extraordinary refrain, which you have to sing twice, at full volume on top A's with E vowels. C'è sempre un nido. And that is really, really hard to control the voice while singing that high on E vowels. Sopranos, women, I should say, can bend the vowel more than men can. It just sounds natural for sopranos to bend that vowel, but men can't really. Tenors really have to go for that. Jonas Kaufmann, of course, has recently recorded it on his popular Italian album. And he's so ridiculously technically fabulous. He does a diminuendo. He actually gets softer on one of the top notes on the E vowel. With my recording, I just thought, let's go for it. Let's do an absolutely, full throttle, all, no holes barred version. So my version is quite spectacularly in your face. It doesn't have the retrospection that some recordings of this song have. But I love it. It's a fabulous song. And so Italian. You can feel the Italian sunshine in it. There's just something glorious about it, especially when you get the descending woodwind scales behind you as you're singing a tune. It's a beautiful song, beautiful song. Thank you for playing it.
Well, let's listen now to Non ti scordar di me.
Partirono le rondini dal mio paese freddo senza sole, cercando primavere di viole, nidi d'amore e di felicità. La mia piccola rondine partì senza lasciarmi un bacio, senza un addio partì. Non ti scordar di me, la vita mia legate a te. Io t'amo sempre più, nel sogno mio rimani tu. Non ti scordar di me, la vita mia legate a te. C'è sempre un nido nel mio cor per te. Non ti scordar di me. Non ti scordar di me, la vita mia legate a te. C'è sempre un nido nel mio cor per
there we heard a Non ti scorda di me, sung there by Ezra Williams, who's my guest today on Radio Verulam. Ezra, am I correct in thinking that you have written a book which will be published in the near future?
I have indeed. I have the proof copy here, in fact. The book's called Fairytales and Oddities, and it's published by TSL Books, TSL Publications. You'll be able to order it from any bookshop, but yeah, you can also order it from their website or on Amazon. It is, I mean, it's called Fairytales and Oddities, but they're not fairy tales in the traditional sense. They're not for children, for a start. They're adult retellings. And some are fairy tales which I've made up. Some are classic fairy tales. The King of the Cats, for example, is an actual fairy tale, but others are not. It's a kind of fantasy world filled with music and bizarre happenings and magical events. And it's kind of been my lockdown project, because I got the book deal for Fairytales and Oddities a couple of months in. It began in March, didn't it? The lockdown, March, April, May, I think it was, where this publisher agreed to take it on. So, of course, at that point, I had to really knuckle down and write it. And it's, you know, it's a good, proper length, novel length book, 10 short stories, all interlinked as well. Yeah, so that was my lockdown work, apart from filming the comedy shows I do online as well. But yeah, so an entire book, pretty much from start to finish, has been a year. The proof copy's here. It's going back to the publisher with like 2 or 3 mistakes in it, and it should be out for general buying it within about a month from now, from TSL Books.
Well, the next piece of music we're going to listen to is yourself singing Vesti la Giuba from Leon Cavallo's opera Pagliacci. Can you tell us more about Pagliacci?
Well, Leon Cavallo's Pagliacci, I mean, Pagliacci, apart from, you know, glorious music, was the beginning, or the official beginning. It wasn't written in order, but it was, I'll explain. It's the beginning of what is called verismo opera, which basically translates as realistic. So they wanted to get away from all the kings and queens. They wanted to get away from the spirits and witches. They wanted to present stories that were real life, actual characters that people could relate to. So peasants, shopkeepers, you know, the working man and woman and other. And Pagliacci has a prologue where the character Tonio, it's a band of clowns, I suppose Pagliacci roughly translates players or clowns, where he comes on stage and says to the audience, "Scusatemi, excuse me a moment while I just explain what we're doing here. We're going to present a new kind of opera for you, a new kind of show. We're going to have, you know, people you recognize, people that you pass in the street, people that you speak to on a day-to-day basis. And we're going to show you this, whatever happens. It may be a comedy, maybe a tragedy, who will know? I think the music tells you it's going to be a tragedy. But yeah, so they really defined a new genre, verismo, which of course then Puccini's entire career was mostly verismo. Towards the end, yes, he started going back into, I mean, with Turandot, he started going back into slightly more mythological things, but the music was very much verismo. And of course, it's often coupled with Cavalleria Rusticana by Mascagni, which I think was written first by only a couple of years, but is generally always, Pagliacci is generally presented as the beginning of verismo, and then Cavalleria, and then everything else that followed afterwards. Although I think they were actually written the other way around. And the story goes that Mascagni was so disillusioned. I mean, all artists, all composers feel this, I think. When you, all people who write books, the minute you finish a long work, longish work, an opera or a novel, there's always a short period where you feel like everything's terrible. You know, every word you write or every note you compose is instantly going to be swallowed on a wave of sentimentality. So you have that moment of self-doubt, and apparently Mascagni actually threw away the manuscript of Cavalleria, and it was his wife, his young wife, who rescued it from the waste paper basket and sent it off to this music competition, which it won. And there's now a staple of the repertoire. And rightly so. It's a fabulous, fabulous opera, you know. Both that and Pagliacci are one-act operas. And the tradition used to be in the old days to have one tenor sing both Cagno in Pagliacci and Turiddu in Cavalleria. But these days, they seem to get different tenors into singing. There was an incredible evening I'd love to have been at back in the 50s, I think, where Richard Tucker sang Cavalleria and Franco Corelli sang Pagliacci. That was a night at the opera, which I think we'd all love to have been at. But I'm lucky enough to have done both with Opera Seria, like I mentioned, a company that sadly no longer exists. But they were based up in Manchester, and I had a glorious time with them. And yes, this recording of Pagliacci is not from that run. This was a studio recording, which I did about 2 years afterwards. So this dates from a couple of years back now. But it suits my voice more, you know, as you get older as a singer, your voice develops, takes on natural, darker qualities. So Pagliacci for me now is one of my favorite and, you know, most often visited roles. I mentioned earlier I'd love to sing something like Otello, maybe Dick Johnson in Fanciulla del West, which I've done with piano but not with orchestra. I mean, that's probably the heaviest Puccini role of all of them, more than Calaf even, although that's arguable. You know, you could have that argument another time. I think Fanciulla del West is a heavier tenor part than Turandot. But yeah, I mean, you know, that's kind of the stuff I sing now. I don't really do any of the Mozart. I did the big Mozart operas, Idomeneo, Magic Flute, Clemenza di Tito. I've sung all them, but I probably wouldn't, I have to say, necessarily go back to singing that stuff on stage. I did do Rigoletto, Verdi's Rigoletto, a few years back in Gran Canaria, of all places, with Icarus Opera. And I knew when I was singing that this would probably be my last Duke of Mantua. It's a young man's role. And even Rodolfo in La Bohème, I possibly wouldn't sing on stage now. Maybe Traviata as well. But, you know, I'm looking now to move into the heavier Verdi, maybe some Wagner even, would be nice.
Well, let us listen now to Vesti la Giuba.
Recitar mentre preso dal delirio, non so più quel che dico e quel che faccio, eppure e dopo sforzati. Beh, sei tu forse un uomo? Tu sei Pagliaccio. Vesti la giubba e la faccia infarina, la gente paga e rider vuole cuore, se Arlecchin ti volo colombina, ridi Pagliaccia e alium applaudirà. Tramuta in lazzi lo spasmo ed il pianto, in una smorfia il singhiozzo e il dolor. Ridi Pagliaccio, soltanto
There we heard Vesti Laguba from Pagliacci, sung by Israel Williams, who is my guest today on Radio Verulam. When I hear that aria, I always think of Freddie Mercury, because the theme from that aria is similar to the beginning of the Queen song from the 1980s, It's a Hard Life. Ezra, are you a fan of Queen at all?
I do love Queen. I do very much like Queen. I got more into Queen over the last, say, 5 years, because Queen were an enormously successful band, oddly enough, in Czech Republic, and my partner is from Czech Republic. So she plays it a lot, and I listen a lot more to it. But, you know, Freddie Mercury's voice was an astonishing instrument. I mean, flexible, malleable, you know, I mean, it was the same from top to bottom, which is what you really want as a singer. There are singers who have had sort of uneven registers, Giuseppe Di Stefano and people like that. But they're unusual. To have a voice like Freddie Mercury's that was completely seamless, it seemed from top to bottom, was astonishing. I'll just quickly say, actually, my favorite Freddie Mercury song of all time is one that almost nobody knows. It's not a Queen song. It's actually from a forgotten musical called Time, written by Dave Clark back in the 80s. And the song is Time Waits for No One. And he recorded it, Mercury recorded that and another song from the musical for some kind of concept album they were trying to do with the title of the musical Time. And I don't think it was even released. It's only been re-released or released for the first time since the film Bohemian Rhapsody became a bit of a hit and won Rami Malek the Best Actor Oscar. And this song, Time Waits for No One, I mean, all your listeners, check it out online. It's the most wonderful song you'll ever hear.
Actually, can you tell us more about the musical Time?
Not that much, because I don't actually know the musical. I only know two songs from it. But the musical was an absolute disaster. I don't know if it even made it to stage. I think the Freddie Mercury collaboration was an attempt to resuscitate it, and it didn't work. So no, I can't tell you much about the musical. Whether it's even been produced yet, I don't know. But it dated from the 80s. I mean, there are thousands and thousands of musicals that simply, sadly disappear. And some of them are rather good. Recently, there was Groundhog Day, the musical, based on the film. That was fabulous, great music, but completely flopped, disappeared. Whether it will ever see the light of day again, who knows? But there's lots of musicals that do just completely, unfortunately, never get a chance to live.
Well, Freddie Mercury recorded a song in 1987 with the Spanish soprano Montserrat Caballé. Montserrat Caballé also played the part of the Marschallin in the 1965 Glyndebourne production of Richard Strauss's opera Die Rosenkavalier. We're going to conclude the programme now by listening to Montserrat Caballé singing an aria from Act 1 of Die Rosenkavalier from the 1965 Glyndebourne production.
Sorry, if I could just add a quick anecdote about Montserrat Caballé. I had the honour of working with her and Mirella Freni a little bit in the 90s. And she had a fabulous thing, which I've never encountered with any other vocal teacher, of making you lie on the floor and putting weights, actual metal weights, on your stomach and rib cage to correct or improve your breathing. And I thought that was rather splendid. I mean, Montserrat was a wonderful, wonderful lady, full of life, ebullient, marvelous cook. And what a singer. Oh, what a singer.
Well, have you performed in the Rosenkavalier at all?
I have sung the Italian singer. I was supposed to music direct it in England, but ended up not doing because the gentleman singing Baron Ochs, unfortunately, sadly passed away just before we were about to start the rehearsal process. And despite the company, this was London Opera Players, desperately searching around for someone else. No one else knew, knew the role of Baron Ochs. in time for the production to go ahead. So unfortunately, that didn't happen. But I did end up singing the Italian singer in Germany, and it was, it's glorious. You get a full evening's work, you get a full evening's pay, and you've only got one aria. And it's about 2.5 minutes. It's not even a 3.5 minute aria, but it is very tough and it is very high. And if you overpoint the voice early on in the aria, you're never going to make it through. You just have to relax and let the voice soar and hope. It climbs higher and higher and higher. It goes up to A flat first, then B flat twice, then a C flat, top C flat. So it's tough, but you get a fabulous. I mean, it always goes down a storm with the audience. People go crazy when you manage it well, and I think we did it about 7 nights, and only 3 of those nights I was very, very happy with. There's a recording of that on YouTube actually, and I'm quite pleased because it did. Yeah, I mean, I don't sing that much Strauss. German isn't my forte. As I said earlier in the show, Italian opera is my kind of staple. I have branched out into a little bit of French, like Werther, Massenet. But yeah, Italian opera is my bag. So yeah, singing Rosenkavalier. And don't forget, of course, the Italian tenor part is in Italian. So even though it's a German opera, that part is in Italian.
Well, that just about brings us to the conclusion of the programme. It just remains for me to say that for the last hour, I've had the very great privilege to be joined at Radio Verulam by Ezra Williams. Ezra, thank you very much indeed for joining us today at Radio Verulam.
Thank you so much, Richard.
Well, thank you. Let's listen now to Montserrat Caballé.